This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 26th edition of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio. Today we have a very special guest. We have an attorney, author, and musician, Neville Johnson. As a musician, Neville performs under the stage name Trevor McShane. I want to give a little background about you, Neville, to the listeners. Neville Johnson is a Southern California native, a graduate of UC Berkeley and Southwestern Law School. Neville practices entertainment and litigation law in the LA Hollywood region. Neville has been referred to by the Los Angeles Times as a go-to lawyer and one of the most feared litigators in Hollywood. Neville has represented many Hollywood celebrities and others. Over a 4-decade career, Neville has recovered, I believe, more than $350 million for actors, writers, and other clients. He contends were shortchanged for their share of royalties and profits. Neville has taken on a lot of the big studios that include Universal, Paramount Pictures, 20th Century Fox. Besides practicing law, Neville's a musician. He's also an author of 2 books about the late famous UCLA basketball coach John Wooden. Neville has written 2 books about John Wooden. One is John Wooden, Pyramids of Success. The second is Woodenisms. Neville's a biographer of John Wooden, has a lot of great insights about this historic figure. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Neville's career, his thoughts on some legal issues. We're going to have a special discussion on Sports and Stuff about Coach John Wooden and his legacy. John Wooden, who passed, I believe, in 2010, coached UCLA men's basketball team to 10 national championships. Real legend, great guy, John Wooden, picked by the Sporting News as the greatest coach of all time. Well, Neville, thank you for coming on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Pleased to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. Is this your first time you've done an interview on a Seattle or a Pacific Northwest space station?
Is it the first time I've been on a radio station in Seattle? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're on the World Wide Web, but we're Seattle-based. Well, good. We can be a little unique here that we can get you on. Well, Neville, I've done a little pre-show research about you. You've had a very interesting life and career. And I believe in one of your John Wooden books, you write, you in the beginning of the book recognized your parents. And tell us what influence your parents have had on your law career and your life.
Well, they're the most powerful influence in my life, the second being John Wooden. And, I had great parents who were very well educated, highly educated. My father went to Yale, and I went to the right, to all the top prep schools, Loyola High in L.A., and so I learned early on that being a lawyer could be a cool or a great profession, particularly if you like to argue, which apparently I am since I was a youth. So my parents encouraged me. I mean, what's wrong with having a profession? This is a good one.
Well, 2 lawyers talking today, and I appreciate your feedback about the legal profession. I think we get kind of a raw deal. There's a lot of very honorable lawyers out there, and unfortunately, there's some stereotypes that aren't always fair either. Well, Neville, I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about law. I mean, sometime if I have you back, we could talk more about some of your legal cases. But a couple legal things I want to discuss with you before we hit on John Wooden, Neville, is I know you've worked a lot in cases involving people's privacy rights. And one interesting issue that you've worked on is the revenge porn issue. Horrible situations when people retaliate against others when they're out to embarrass people through porn, and there's a lot of predators out there. Neville, do you think that more statutes are the answer to combat revenge porn? Give me your feedback on what we can do to decrease revenge porn.
Well, there are criminal statutes in place in a number of jurisdictions, so that's a help. The Internet service providers, as a general rule, are uncooperative when it comes to this kind of stuff ordinarily, and they have to be prodded and pushed. And it also happens in the case of defamation. They just don't care, or invasions of privacy much of the time. But if it's revenge porn, you may be able to induce the Internet service provider to take it down. Would more statutes be helpful? Absolutely, and on a federal level. And while we're talking about this generally, let me just let everyone in your audience know.
Sure.
Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act was which is a federal statute, immunizes. In other words, you cannot sue an internet service provider if somebody puts up something that is defamatory or an invasion of privacy. And that's just wrong. I was at a meeting the other day, and they had a lawyer from Google there, and I said, suppose somebody puts up and says that so-and-so is a child molester, and it's totally untrue, and it's going to ruin his career and his family relations. Are you going to do anything about it? And the guy from Google said, no, Section 230, we don't have to do anything, and we don't have the resources to do it.
Congress needs to change that.
I thought, you don't have the resources. You're like one of the top 5 corporations in the world. So any newspaper would have to retract. It's time for the internet service providers to man up, step up to the plate.
Yeah, no, it's a real problem right now. Neville, what do you think of how some civil libertarians believe that some of these anti-revenge porn statutes may have some First Amendment problems? What's your take on that issue?
You know, there's a give and take for everything in this country on almost every single issue. But take a look at what's going on overseas, where there are much more intense and serious restrictions on privacy in the European economic community, and we should be doing that. But the lobby is so powerful of the internet service providers. Google alone, I believe, has 300 lobbyists on Capitol Hill. So it's a very, very intimidating. But in today's climate, with the president and his attack on the press and the problems that we've had with Facebook of not keep taking care of its own house, it may be time that people may be loosening up, the senators and the legislature, to want to do something about it. But it's becoming an increasing problem each day as the society becomes more aware of how our privacy is being manipulated.
Big subject. We're not going to solve it in this interview, but big subjects there. This is Paul Schneiderman of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with John Wooden biographer and Hollywood power lawyer Neville Johnson. Neville, I know you've done a lot of work, and I mentioned this in the introduction. We represented actors and writers who've been shortchanged or allegedly were shortchanged over profit participation deals. I know you settled a $26 million class action. You've done a lot of work where you've taken on some of the big Hollywood studios. This may sound like a naive question, Neville, but what is it about actors and writers and studios? There seems to be a lot of litigation. Is that just a stereotype, or is it just the same as any other business in terms of litigation issues?
Do I want to say that the entertainment and movie industry in particular is sleazier than any other business? Like,
no, is it more litigious, I guess?
Banking or cars? No. Is it fraught with horrible abuses of talent? Absolutely. And why does that happen? Because they have the power and the money, and they're greedy, and their attitude is, if we do something wrong, we'll let them prove it, let them do it. And that is expensive, and for many people, talent, they're afraid that they're going to get blacklisted. And you know what? That's a legitimate concern overall. So it's been going on and will continue until we stop making movies.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your insights. I mean, I'm not in LA, or this is a Seattle-based show, but it just, when you read things in the media about Hollywood and studios, it just seems like there's a lot of litigation. But you know that industry real well. Neville, you've had a lot of famous clients. I know you represented the widow of the late John Lennon, Yoko Ono. You represented one of my favorite actors, the late Jack Klugman, who died in 2012. He played Quincy M.E. in that great TV show. What was it like working with Jack Klugman, Neville?
Jack was a gentleman and a class act, and was most proud of having done Quincy, where he said, look, I stayed at the studio 2 or 3 nights a week. I'd sleep there. I'd do casting. I'd do work on the scripts, etc. And so we sued for not getting the full payment he should have gotten. And his response at the time was, I don't want their money. I just want my money. So, he was brave enough to take on Universal, and he was a good guy. Yeah,
no, that's a real historic actor you worked with. And are you in touch at all with Yoko Ono as the years have gone on?
We're in touch.
Good, good. Did you enjoy working with Yoko Ono as a client?
Did what?
Did you enjoy working with Yoko Ono as a client?
Oh yeah. She's fun. Sure.
Yeah, we've had a lot of famous clients. If I had more time, I'd like to ask you more. Real quickly, before we go into John Wood, Neville, there was a recent U.S. Supreme Court opinion that makes it easier for employers to block employees from pursuing class action cases. What do you think about the right to a civil jury trial being on continual assault?
This is one of the biggest problems in the United States of America right now. Every contract that you sign when you rent a car or sign up for a credit card says you have to go to arbitration and you waive your rights to participate in a class action. Well, that just eviscerates any real remedy, because as one Supreme Court justice said, who's going to sue over $17? So it's a big problem, and 80%, as I understand it, of all employer-employee contracts in America now say you have to go to arbitration and you waive a class action as well. So a lot of these wage and hour cases where people aren't getting their meal breaks and aren't worthy of being individual cases are not going to be brought hereafter. So that's a terrible problem, and it's not going to change until we get a Congress that has the mindset to do so. And who knows, maybe that'll happen if there's a Democratic Congress. But right now, that's the law in this country. And here's what the grief is about arbitrations. It is thought by many that the arbitrators are biased in favor of the companies. Why? Because they give them all the business. And if you ever really rule against them seriously, they may never work again for that company or in that industry. And that's a very real problem overall. So
big problems.
Arbitration, and you know, it costs a bloody fortune sometimes to hire these arbitrators. You're getting $500 an hour. Now there is a rule in some states that says, well, if you're an employee and you don't have the money, then they have to pay. The employer has to pay for the cost of the arbitration. But that doesn't sound so good either to me. But I suppose it's the only workable solution.
Access to courts is a huge issue. We hear a lot about Roe v. Wade, which is very important, but access to courts is a huge issue that the next Supreme Court justice is going to have a role in. And the whole thing scares me. I think two plaintiffs' lawyers talking right now. I think we're on probably similar pages on this. This is Paul Schneiderman of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with my special guest, attorney and author Neville Johnson. Neville, let's move on to John Wooden. How did you, as a UC Berkeley graduate and Southwestern Law graduate, I don't believe you went to UCLA. How did you become so interested in the late, great John Wooden?
Well, it was 1982 or so, and that's when I was particularly working with Yoko Ono. And I thought, well, I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve. I have the biggest group in the history of rock and roll. And I saw this thing called the Pyramid of Success on somebody's wall. And I said, who did that? And he said, John Wooden. I said, the basketball coach? He goes, yeah. Well, I became interested in that philosophy because it's non-sectarian, totally logical, and I wanted to learn more about it. So I'd been a journalist in college to some degree, and I decided I was going to find Coach Wooden and talk to him about it. So I called him up, said, I'd like to come talk to you about it. He said, okay. And then I said, I'd like to interview you. And then I didn't know what I was going to do with it. He said, okay, fine. And I said, I want to write a book about you. He said, no, my wife is ill, and I haven't got the time. So I wrote the first few chapters, sent it to him, and a month later, it came back redlined by him, and that was the genesis of it.
Isn't that something? Did you get to know John Wooden pretty well personally, Neville?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I interviewed him 6 or 7 times. I got to know him. I mean, I got to know him, but I wasn't like tight, like Kareem or Walton or many of the other players.
Yeah, but you got to know him a little bit. I'm going to ask you.
You know, he was awesome. Awesome.
Quite a guy. What do you think made him stand out so much on the integrity and ethics ends? When American sports fans think of coaches that had and have integrity, the name John Wooden always comes up. What made him stand out so much?
Well, he was a very moral guy. He never smoked. He never drank, except once. he used to smoke a bit, but he gave that up many years before. And basically, he said, I asked him, why weren't you ever on the leadership of the Coaches Association? He said, well, Neville, after the games, I didn't go to the bars. I wanted to be home with my wife or whatever. And so he just was a saint in so many words, just a very moral guy who lived his life the way he thought it should be, and he did for the most part. I try as a lawyer, and you know this too. My job, much of the time, is to disprove the credibility or diminish the credibility of the other side. And so I go and I look for all the peccadillos and wrongdoing of somebody, so I can catch them in a lie or show that they are, not up to what they say they are. I did that in Coach Wooden. I interviewed 200 people, and you know what? The conclusion is that he's everything people say he is. He was just a man of incredible skill and class. The other thing I want to say about Coach, one thing about him is his family. He was very influenced by his father, who taught him the rules of life and how to operate. But Coach Wooden once said, family is first and then the Lord, and I hope the Lord will understand. And so he had it in perspective what life was about, and his daughter said, unless you had been at the game, and this is after a game, you would have no idea who won, because he was completely unemotional about it. His whole deal, his entire philosophy is to do your best all the time.
All business guy.
Success is peace of mind. Success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction and knowing you've made the effort to do your best. And the key ingredients are enthusiasm and hard work and going after a great and difficult challenge, which he calls competitive greatness.
Neville, one thing you mentioned that was interesting, and I read your book the other day, is that Wooden was never really in the college coaches fraternity, was he?
Not at all. That's not to say that he didn't have friends,
right?
But that's a lot of sharp elbows there overall, and he did have a lot of great friends. But he played his own game, and another thing that I liked about him is he said I scouted less than any other coach out there because for me it was all about fundamentals. We let him know exactly what we're going to do, and then we roll into town and mow him down, and that's what he did.
Neville, one thing I read is John Wooden was so universally respected, but one person who seemed to have some issues with John Wooden is Coach Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight apparently was critical of some of Wooden's interactions with a UCLA alum. Give me your take on what Bobby Knight's issues were with John Wooden.
It's not in the book because I saw Bobby Knight, I'm going to say about 5 years ago, and I asked him if I could interview him about Wooden, and he wrote me back a letter that was very nasty about Wooden, saying that Wooden effectively was a cheater of some sorts.
Oh gosh!
Because during the time that Wooden was there was a booster named Sam Gilbert who was close, particularly to some of the black athletes, and who was alleged to have scalped their tickets and bought them items or given them jobs that they didn't have to work at, etc. Wooden knew of Gilbert, but had nothing to do with him and couldn't control Gilbert. Gilbert was ultimately banned by the NCAA after Wooden had retired. But he felt that there was, I guess, improper recruiting as a result of Gilbert and or other malfeasance by him overall. I think it's sour grapes. He's a caustic, difficult guy, and there are some detractors who say that Sam Gilbert should be looked at much more importantly in terms of what he did. I don't think so overall.
Interesting analysis.
There's boosters at every school.
Yeah, interesting analysis. Well, I just thought that was interesting. John, you're right. Bobby Knight is not known as the warmest guy in the world, but I thought his comments were kind of interesting. Well, we only got, believe it or not, 6 or 7 minutes left, Neville. I want to get a few more topics in about John Wooden. One thing about John Wooden, Tell us how he and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, then Lou Alcindor, developed such a close relationship. They were such different men in so many ways. Give a little analysis on that, Neville.
First of all, I want to commend everyone to read Kareem's book called Coach Wooden and Me. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And Wooden said, I learned more about the human race from Kareem than anybody else. He said, you have no idea what it was like to be with Kareem and hear people say, look at that big black freak. And, you know, Kareem is a very intelligent guy and
sure.
also very sort of, I don't know, reserved also. But he loved Wooden and Wooden loved him. And that's really the story of it all. And then Wooden won his first championship with his shortest team, and then he got Kareem, and he spent the summer talking to Wilt Chamberlain and other coaches about how to deal with a big man on the team. And so he was able to teach and coach Kareem into being the skyhook king that he became. And let's remember that Kareem ended up with the highest amount of points in history for the NCAA.
They were quite
for pro ball.
They were quite a player coach team. Again, Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with author and Hollywood power lawyer Neville Johnson. Now, real quickly, what's a nugget? Give me something that people don't know about John Wooden. Throw out one nugget that a lot of Wooden experts don't know about.
That he was super educated and smart and had a degree in English literature and wrote poetry and recited poetry, and that he was extremely witty with everybody all the time. He had a twinkle in his eye. And the other thing about Coach Wooden is that he was nice to everybody all the time.
Real gentleman.
So that, you know, his daughter said, we'd be at a parking lot in a hotel, and we'd have to pull him away because he would just chat up the parking attendant or whoever it could have been. So he treated the president of the United States the same way as he did anybody who he met along the way. In other words, I think my mother once said to me, "What would you like on your grave?" And I said that he was kind, because I think that's the greatest characteristic a person should have. And I would say that's what I would say about Coach Wooden, is that he was kind and he was thoughtful about others all the time.
Well, seemed like a terrific man. Real quickly, where do you think John Wooden today would be on some sports issues that are going on, Neville? Where do you think he'd be on this whole Colin Kaepernick national anthem NFL dispute? Just where would Wooden be on 2018 on that issue, you think?
Well, I guess I'll analogize it to Bill Walton laid down on the boulevard during the Vietnam War protests, and I think he got arrested. And but he was exercising his First Amendment rights, and I think that Wooden respected people exercising their First Amendment rights, but I don't think he approved of it overall. So I don't think. I think he would be. He'd be probably okay with it if people wanted to do it. I mean, he'd probably recommend that don't come out on the field.
You know, Neville, we read a lot of books. We read a lot of books. Like, where would Lincoln be today? I asked you, where would a John Wooden be today on some issues? So it's always kind of interesting to think where a historic figure, mayor, could be on an issue going on today. So what is your favorite John Wooden quote, Neville? There's so many of them. Can you throw out one that you really enjoy?
Well, he's most famous for failing to prepare, is preparing to fail, and be quick but don't hurry. But a couple I like is the softest pillow is a clear conscience. And another would be, isn't it amazing how much can be accomplished if nobody cares who gets the credit? And also, the star is the rest of the team. Those are several.
Great quotes for life in general. Neville, so we hear a lot about famous people who sometimes get approached for political office. In your state, of course, Ronald Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger were celebrities and later became politicians. Did John Wooden ever consider running for public office? Did that ever come up at all?
Absolutely not. And he also never wanted to coach in the pros, although he was approached to do that. He was offered at one time. I believe there was a discussion for him to coach a professional baseball team because he loved baseball.
I read that,
but he didn't do that. He just loved college ball. And I'll mention one other thing. If you were talking about what he would have disapproved of today,
yeah,
he was so unhappy about players being able to leave after a year and go join the pros, because he said to all of his student athletes, he called them, "You're here for an education first and then to play basketball."
He wasn't a one and done guy. That's really interesting, Neville. Real quickly about Wooden, he and Bill Walton had kind of a complicated relationship, though, didn't they?
Well, Bill was a guy who liked to test the boundaries at times, and the famous story is that he showed up with hair that Wooden said was too long, and he said, "You're not going to play," and they said, "I don't want to get my hair cut." And he said, "So Bill, we're sure going to miss you." So Bill hopped on his bicycle, got a haircut, and he did it. But what a fascinating guy Walton is. There's a guy who had a terrible stuttering problem, and now he's a major broadcaster.
Yeah, no, I see him. I see him up in Seattle broadcasting UW games at times. Well, Neville, we're almost done. We have less than a minute left, and I've really enjoyed having you on, and I recommend the listeners read your books, John Wooden, Pyramids of Success, and Woodenism, and maybe if I get you back next time, we can talk more about your music career. You operate on the stage name Trevor McShane. But what's in the future for Neville Johnson?
Well, I'm going to be filing a lot more class actions in the coming weeks in the entertainment industry. I've got a novel coming out in the next few months.
Great.
And also a book of poetry. I have a book of poetry already out of love poems called What Took You So Long, and I've got another one in the works of 50 or so secret agent poems, in which I write about secret agents.
Well, we look forward to seeing them. Well, Neville, thank you so much for coming on Sports and Stuff, and that you and I stay in touch.
Thank you.
You take care.